the quiet of the night, when the world falls silent, the shadows of the past whisper their secrets. Welcome to Shadows of the Past, where we unravel the chilling true stories of crime, betrayal, and justice. Tonight, we dive into 10 haunting cases that shook communities, exposed hidden darkness, and left scars that linger to this day. Settle in, let the rain wash over you, and allow the stories to unfold. These are tales not just of loss, but of the relentless pursuit of truth. Close your eyes and listen. Part 1. The Murder of Samantha Dean, Fort Worth, Texas, June 6, 2000. In the heart of Fort Worth, Texas, the summer of 2000 was warm, the kind of warmth that wraps around you like a blanket. But for Samantha Dean, a 39-year-old mother of 2, that warmth would turn cold in an instant. Her story begins not with a scream, but with a silence that would echo through her home, her neighborhood, and the lives of everyone who knew her. Samantha was the kind of woman who lit up a room. A dedicated nurse, she had a smile that could calm even the most anxious patient. Her days were spent balancing her career with raising her 2 children, Emily and Jacob, both still in grade school. She was their rock, their safe harbor in a world that could be unpredictable. But beneath her steady exterior, there were cracks forming. Cracks that traced back to her past, to a man named Gregory Johnson, Gregory and Samantha's marriage had ended years earlier, but the ties between them were never fully severed. Their divorce was messy, filled with arguments over custody and money. By 2000, Samantha was trying to move forward to build a new life for herself and her children. Gregory, however, wasn't ready to let go. He lingered on the edges of her world, a shadow she couldn't quite shake. Neighbors would later recall seeing him drive by her house, his truck idling just a little too long at the curb. There was something unsettling about it, they said, but no one thought it would lead to this. On the evening of June 6, 2000, Samantha was at home preparing dinner in her modest kitchen. The kids were upstairs, lost in their homework or the hum of the TV. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. But as the clock ticked past 7 p.m., something shattered the ordinary. A neighbor sipping coffee on her porch heard a muffled cry from Samantha's house. It was brief, fleeting, like a sound you convince yourself you imagine. But when a neighbor glanced over, she saw something that made her heart skip. A figure slipping out of Samantha's back door, moving quickly into the dusk. By the next morning, Samantha's absence was impossible to ignore. Her children, confused and frightened, called their grandmother when their mother didn't wake them for school. When police arrived, they found a scene that turned their blood cold. Samantha lay lifeless on her kitchen floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. She had been stabbed repeatedly, the wounds deep and deliberate. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and laughter, was now a tableau of horror. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows or splintered doors. Whoever did this had been let in, or had a key. But investigation began with a flurry of questions. Who could have done this to a woman so beloved? The Fort Worth Police Department turned their attention to the most obvious suspect, Gregory Johnson. His history with Samantha was no secret. Neighbors whispered about their arguments about the way Gregory's temper flared when Samantha set boundaries. When detectives brought him in for questioning, Gregory was calm. Too calm, some said. He admitted to seeing Samantha the day before her death, claiming they'd met to discuss custody. "We talked, that's all," he said, his voice flat, his eyes avoiding the interrogator's gaze. But there was something in his story that didn't sit right. His alibi was shaky, his timeline riddled with gaps. And then there was the matter of his truck, spotted near Samantha's house the night of the murder. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a thread that led them away from Gregory, or so they thought. A witness, a teenager walking his dog that fateful evening, reported seeing a man leaving Samantha's house. He described someone unfamiliar, tall and wiry with a hurried gait. The description didn't match Gregory, but it did lead police to David Wright, a known associate of Gregory's, with a rap sheet that included assault and burglary. David was a drifter, a man who lived on the fringes of Fort Worth's underbelly. When police searched his apartment, they found something chilling, a blood-stained shirt tucked away in a laundry basket. Tests would later confirm the blood belonged to Samantha Dean. The discovery turned the case on its head. Was David the killer, acting alone, or was there more to the story? Detectives pressed David, and under the weight of the evidence, he cracked. He confessed to the murder, but his confession came with a twist, one that pointed back to Gregory Johnson, According to David, Gregory had approached him weeks earlier, offering a deal. Kill Samantha, and Gregory would pay him handsomely. The motive? Control. Gregory couldn't stand the idea of Samantha moving on, of her raising their children without him. He wanted her gone, and he wanted it to look like a random act of violence. The revelation was a gut punch to Samantha's family. Her sister Laura sat in the police station, tears streaming down her face as she listened to the details. She was trying to protect her kids, Laura whispered. She didn't deserve this. The evidence against Gregory and David mounted. Phone records showed multiple calls between the two men in the days leading up to the murder. A search of Gregory's home uncovered a burner phone, hidden in a drawer, with texts that sealed his fate. One message, sent to David just hours before Samantha's death, read, "Make it quick, no mistakes." The trial that followed was a spectacle, drawing crowds to the Fort Worth courthouse. The prosecution painted a picture of a calculated plot, driven by Gregory's obsession and David's greed. They presented the bloodstained shirt, the phone records, and David's confession, each piece a nail in the coffin of the defense's case. Gregory's lawyers tried to shift the blame, arguing that David acted alone, that Gregory was a grieving ex-husband caught in a web of circumstance. But the jury wasn't swayed. After a grueling 3-week trial, they delivered their verdict, guilty. David Wright was sentenced to death, his fate sealed by the brutality of his actions. Gregory Johnson received life without parole, a punishment that felt both just and hollow to those who loved Samantha. In the aftermath, Fort Worth grappled with the loss of one of its own. Samantha's children, now in the care of their grandmother, struggled to make sense of a world without their mother. The community rallied around them, organizing vigils and fundraisers, but no amount of support could fill the void. A small memorial was erected in Samantha's honor, a plaque outside the hospital where she worked, inscribed with words that captured her essence. A healer, a mother, a light that will never fade. But the story of Samantha Dean is more than a tragedy. It's a reminder of the fragility of trust, of the darkness that can lurk behind familiar faces. Gregory Johnson thought he could control Samantha, even in death. David Wright thought he could trade a life for money. They were wrong. Samantha's memory endures, carried by those who loved her, by the children she raised, and by a community that refuses to forget. As the rain falls outside, her story lingers, a whisper in the shadows of the past. The rain continues to fall, a steady rhythm that carries us to another town, another tragedy. In Rockport, Texas, a teacher's life is cut short, and the truth lies buried in the secrets of those closest to her. Stay with us. The shadows have more to tell. Part 2, The Murder of Angela Carter, Rockport, Texas, June 23, 2000. The small coastal town of Rockport, Texas, is the kind of place where everyone knows your name. In the summer of 2000, the salty breeze carried the promise of lazy days by the shore, of fishing boats bobbing on the horizon. But beneath the surface of this idyllic town, a storm was brewing. One that would tear through the life of Angela Carter, a woman whose warmth touched everyone she met. Her story begins not with a crash, but with a quiet unraveling, a thread pulled loose until everything came apart. Angela Carter was 47 years old, a high school teacher whose classroom was a haven for her students. She taught history, but her lessons went beyond dates and events. She taught her kids to believe in themselves, to chase dreams even when the world felt heavy. Her laugh was infectious, her kindness a beacon in Rockport's close-knit community. Angela was married to Charles Carter, a local accountant, and together they had a teenage son, Lucas, who was the center of their world. To outsiders, the Carters were the picture of stability, a charming house on a quiet street, a golden retriever named Rusty, and a marriage that seemed to weather life's storms. But appearances, as they so often do, hid a darker truth. By the summer of 2000, Angela's marriage was fraying at the edges. Friends noticed a change in her, a hesitation in her smile, a shadow in her eyes. She confided in a few close colleagues about arguments with Charles, about his growing distance. Money was tight, and Charles's temper had begun to flare more often. There were whispers, too, of an affair. Rumors that Charles was spending late nights with a coworker, a woman whose name floated through Rockport's gossip mill. Angela, ever private, brushed off the rumors, but those closest to her could see the weight she carried. She was trying to hold her family together, to shield Lucas from the cracks in their home. but some cracks are too deep to mend. On the evening of June 23, 2000, Angela was at home grading papers in the soft glow of her living room lamp. Lucas was at a friend's house staying over for the night. Charles, according to neighbors, was seen leaving the house around 6 p.m., his car pulling out of the driveway with a haste that raised eyebrows. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels alive with possibility. But sometime between 8 and 10 p.m., that quiet was shattered. A neighbor walking her dog noticed the Carters' front door slightly ajar. It was unusual. Angela was meticulous about locking up. The neighbor hesitated, then called out, "No answer." She pushed the door open, her heart pounding, and stepped inside. What she found would haunt her for years. Angela lay on the living room floor, her body still, surrounded by a scattering of papers, blood pooled beneath her, seeping into the rug. She had been stabbed multiple times, the wounds brutal, relentless. The room bore signs of a struggle, overturned books, a shattered lamp. But there was no sign of a break-in, no forced locks or broken windows. Whoever did this hadn't needed to force their way in. They were already inside or had been welcomed. The Rockport Police Department descended on the scene, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The town, unaccustomed to such violence, buzzed with shock and fear. Who could have done this to Angela, a woman who seemed to have no enemies? The investigation zeroed in on Charles Carter almost immediately. His marriage troubles were no secret, and his behavior in the hours after Angela's death raised red flags. When police contacted him, he claimed he'd been at a bar across town, drowning his stress in whiskey, but his alibi was flimsy. Bartenders vaguely recalled seeing him, but no one could pin down the exact time. And then there was Lucas, their 16-year-old son, who told police something that shifted the entire case. Lucas, his voice trembling, recounted a fight he'd overheard the night before his mother's death. Angela and Charles had argued in the kitchen, their voices rising until Charles stormed out. Lucas couldn't make out all the words, but he remembered his mother's tone. Angry, but also afraid. "She told him she was done," Lucas said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "She said she couldn't keep pretending." Those words hung in the air, a chilling prelude to what would come. Detectives began to piece together a motive. Charles, they learned, was indeed having an affair, a fact confirmed by coworkers who'd seen him with the other woman. The affair had strained the Carters' finances. Charles was funneling money to his mistress, leaving Angela to cover bills alone. Divorce loomed, a prospect that threatened Charles's comfortable life. Angela, friends said, was preparing to leave him, to take Lucas and start over. For a man like Charles who craved control, that was a threat he couldn't tolerate. The physical evidence began to pile up. A search of Charles's car turned up traces of Angela's blood on the passenger seat, faint but unmistakable. Fibers from the living room rug were found on his shoes. And then there was the murder weapon, a kitchen knife, missing from the Carters' home, discovered in a dumpster 2 miles away. It bore traces of Angela's blood, and crucially, Charles's fingerprints. The case was building brick by brick, but Charles maintained his innocence, his demeanor cold and detached. "I loved her," he told detectives, his voice devoid of emotion. "I would never hurt her." But the evidence told a different story. As the investigation deepened, the town of Rockport grappled with its grief. Angela's students left flowers outside the high school, their handwritten notes a testament to her impact. "You made me believe I could be anything," one read. Her colleagues, shaken, organized a memorial, but the weight of her loss was unbearable. Lucas, caught between mourning his mother and reckoning with his father's betrayal, withdrew into himself. The community rallied around him, but no amount of support could erase the nightmare he was living. The trial began in the spring of 2001, and it was a spectacle that gripped Rockport. The prosecution painted Charles as a man consumed by ego and desperation, a husband who chose murder over the humiliation of divorce. They presented the blood evidence, the knife, and Lucas's testimony, each piece a thread in a tapestry of guilt. The defense fought back, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial, that someone else could have entered the home. They pointed to a lack of eyewitnesses, to the possibility of an unknown intruder, but their arguments faltered against the weight of the facts. The jury, after hours of deliberation, returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Charles Carter was sentenced to life without parole, his fate sealed in a courtroom filled with anguished faces. The aftermath was a slow, painful healing for Rockport. Lucas, now living with his aunt, struggled to rebuild his life. The house on the quiet street was sold, its memories too heavy to bear. Angela's legacy lived on in the scholarships established in her name, funds to help students like the ones she'd inspired. But the scars remained. The town, once defined by its innocence, now carried a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in the safest places, darkness can take root. As the rain falls outside, Angela Carter's story lingers in the air, a whisper of loss and resilience. She was a teacher, a mother, a woman who deserved so much more than the fate she met. Her murder exposed the fragility of trust, the cost of secrets kept too long. Charles Carter thought he could erase her, could bury his sins in the silence of that June night. He was wrong. Angela's light, though extinguished, still shines in the hearts of those who loved her, in the students she uplifted, in the community that carries her memory forward. The shadows of the past hold her story, and they will not let it fade. Part 3, The Murder of Kathleen Katie Wilson, Maplewood, Illinois, June 18, 2000. In the sleepy town of Maplewood, Illinois, the summer of 2000 was a time of long days and soft evenings, where fireflies danced in the twilight and neighbors waved from their porches. It was a place where life felt safe, predictable, the kind of town where nothing truly bad was supposed to happen. But for Kathleen Wilson, known to everyone as Katie, the warmth of that summer would turn to ice, her story unraveling in a way that would shatter Maplewood's illusion of safety. This is a tale of trust betrayed, of secrets buried in plain sight, and of a darkness that crept into the heart of a family. Katie Wilson was 38 years old, a nurse whose compassion defined her. At the local hospital, she was the one who held patients' hands during their darkest moments, her gentle voice a lifeline. Outside of work, Katie was a devoted mother to her 2 children, 12-year-old Sophie and 9-year-old Ethan. Her home, a cozy 2-story on a tree-lined street, was filled with laughter and the chaos of family life. Katie's husband, Mark Wilson, was a high school math teacher, respected in the community for his quiet demeanor and dedication. Together, they seemed to embody the Maplewood ideal. A couple who worked hard, loved deeply, and built a life others envied. But beneath the surface, there were currents pulling them apart, currents Katie couldn't see until it was too late. By the spring of 2000, those closest to Katie noticed a shift. Her usual warmth seemed dimmed, her smiles less frequent. She confided in a coworker, Sarah, about troubles at home. Mark had become controlling, she said, his once easygoing nature replaced by suspicion and demands. He questioned her whereabouts, checked her phone, and grew angry over small things. A late shift at the hospital, a friendly chat with a colleague. Sarah urged Katie to talk to someone, but Katie brushed it off. He's just stressed, she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. It'll pass. But it didn't pass. And then there were the rumors, whispers that Mark was seeing someone else, a woman from the school where he taught. Katie never mentioned the affair, but her friends saw the toll it was taking, the way she carried herself like someone bracing for a storm. On the evening of June 18, 2000, Katie was at home with Sophie and Ethan. Mark had left earlier saying he was meeting a friend for drinks. The kids were in their rooms, the house quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. Around 9 p.m., a neighbor noticed something odd. Katie's car was still in the driveway, but the house was dark, unusually so for a family with young children. The neighbor thought little of it at the time, assuming they'd gone to bed early. But by morning, when Katie didn't show up for her shift at the hospital, alarm bells began to ring. Her coworker Sarah called the house, then Katie's cell. No answer. Worried, she drove to the Wilson home and found the front door unlocked. Stepping inside, she called out, "Silence." Then in the hallway, she saw a smear of blood on the floor. Police arrived within minutes, their radios crackling in the stillness. The house was eerily intact, no signs of a break-in, no overturned furniture, but Katie was gone. The blood in the hallway, later confirmed as hers, was the only clue something was terribly wrong. Sophie and Ethan, shaken and confused, told police their mother had been fine the night before. They hadn't heard anything unusual, no screams or footstep or more. Contacted at his school, rushed home, his face a mask of shock. "She was here when I left," he stammered. "I don't understand." But his words rang hollow to the detectives, who noticed his hands trembling, his eyes darting to the corners of the room. The search for Katie began immediately, with Maplewood's small police force combing the town and nearby woods. Volunteers joined in, clutching flyers with Katie's photo, her warm smile a stark contrast to the fear gripping the community. Days passed with no sign of her. each one tightening the knot of dread in the town's collective chest. Detectives turned their focus to Mark. His alibi, drinks with a friend, was shaky. A friend confirmed they'd met, but only for an hour, leaving hours unaccounted for. Phone records showed calls between Mark and a number linked to a female colleague, late-night conversations that raised eyebrows. And then there was the money. Large withdrawals from the couple's joint account, unexplained and sudden. A week after Katie's disappearance, a hiker in a wooded area 10 miles from Maplewood made a grim discovery. A body, partially covered by leaves, lay in a shallow clearing. It was Katie. She had been strangled, her neck bearing the brutal marks of hands that squeezed the life from her. The medical examiner estimated she'd been dead since the night she vanished. The news hit Maplewood like a tidal wave, shattering the town's sense of security. Katie, the nurse who'd saved countless lives, was gone, her light snuffed out in a place she should have been safe. The investigation zeroed in on Mark with renewed intensity. Detectives uncovered a pattern of control and deceit. Katie's friends revealed she'd been planning to confront Mark about his affair, to demand a separation. She'd even consulted a lawyer, a fact Mark likely knew. Physical evidence began to mount. DNA under Katie's fingernails matched Mark's, suggesting she'd fought back. Fibers from the rug in their home were found on her body, linking her death to the house. And then there was Mark's alibi, which unraveled further when his colleague admitted she'd been with him that night, but not at a bar. They'd been at her apartment, a detail Mark had conveniently omitted. Mark's interrogation was a study in unraveling composure. He maintained his innocence, claiming he'd never hurt Katie, that he loved her, but his story crumbled under scrutiny. Why hadn't he reported her missing? Why the secret withdrawals? Why the lies about his whereabouts? Faced with the DNA evidence, he grew silent, his face pale. Detectives pressed harder, and a picture emerged, a man consumed by jealousy and fear, terrified of losing his carefully curated life. Katie's decision to leave him to take the children and start anew was a blow he couldn't accept. In a moment of rage, he'd ended her life, then tried to erase his tracks. The trial, held in the fall of 2001, was a crucible for Maplewood. The prosecution laid out a meticulous case, weaving together the DNA, the financial records, and the testimony of Katie's friends and children. Sophie, her voice steady despite her grief, recounted her mother's fear in the weeks before her death. She said Dad was acting strange, she told the court. She was scared, but she didn't want us to worry. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that someone else could have entered the home. They pointed to a lack of direct witnesses, to the possibility of an unknown assailant. But the jury saw through the smoke. After 2 days of deliberation, they returned a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Mark Wilson was sentenced to life without parole, his fate sealed in a courtroom filled with tears. The aftermath was a slow, aching process for Maplewood. Sophie and Ethan, now living with their grandparents, faced a future without either parent. The community wrapped them in support, organizing fundraisers and counseling, but the loss was a wound that wouldn't heal. Katie's hospital colleagues established a scholarship in her name, a tribute to her dedication to healing others. A small garden was planted outside the hospital, its flowers a quiet reminder of the woman who'd been a light in so many lives. But Katie's story is more than a tragedy. It's a warning. It speaks to the dangers hidden in the places we feel safest, to the masks people wear even in the closest relationships. Mark Wilson thought he could control Katie, could silence her dreams and her courage. He was wrong. Her memory lives on in her children, in the patients she comforted, in the town that refuses to forget. As the rain falls outside, Katie Wilson's story whispers through the shadows, a testament to a life taken too soon, and a truth that could not be buried. The rain drums softly, carrying us from the woods of Illinois to the misty hills of the Pacific Northwest. Another woman vanishes, another secret waits to be uncovered. Stay with us. The shadows have more to tell. Part 4. The Murder of Emily Clark, Evergreen, Pacific Northwest, July 15, 2000. In the mist-shrouded town of Evergreen, nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest, the summer of 2000 was a time of quiet beauty. Towering pines framed the horizon, their branches heavy with the weight of morning dew. The air carried the scent of damp earth and cedar, a reminder of nature's embrace. But beneath this serene facade, a darkness was stirring, one that would claim the life of Emily Clark, a young woman whose light burned bright, until it was snuffed out by obsession. Her story is one of love turned lethal, of trust shattered, and of a town forever changed by the truth that emerged from the shadows. Emily Clark was 29 years old, freelance graphic designer whose creativity spilled into every corner of her life. Her small apartment in Evergreen was a canvas of color walls adorned with her artwork, shelves brimming with books and plants. Emily had a way of making people feel seen, her quick laugh and curious eyes drawing others in. She was independent, fiercely so, carving out a life on her own terms in a town where newcomers were rare. But in the spring of 2000, Emily's world shifted when she met David Foster, a man who seemed to step out of a dream, charming, attentive, and dangerously deceptive. David was new to Evergreen, a drifter who arrived with little more than a duffel bag and a smile that disarmed. He took odd jobs around town, fixing cars or painting houses, his easy demeanor winning over locals. When he met Emily at a coffee shop, their connection was instant. They bonded over art and music, spending late nights talking under the stars. To Emily, David was a breath of fresh air, a partner who seemed to understand her restless spirit. But those closest to her noticed something off. Her best friend, Rachel, saw the way David's gaze lingered too long, the way he'd interrupt Emily's stories with a possessive edge. "He's intense," Rachel warned. Emily laughed it off. "He's just passionate," she said. But passion, as Evergreen would learn, can be a mask for something far darker. By early July, Emily's friends saw a change. Her texts became sporadic, her usual vibrancy dulled. She confided in Rachel that David was growing clingy, his affection bordering on control. He'd show up at her apartment unannounced, question her about her clients, even suggest she quit freelancing to spend more time with him. Emily, torn between her feelings and her instincts, decided to pull back. She told David she needed space, a decision that would set a deadly chain of events in motion. On the evening of July 15th, 2000, Emily was last seen leaving a local diner, where she met David for what she thought was a final talk. She never made it home. The next morning, Rachel grew worried when Emily didn't answer her phone. She drove to Emily's apartment, her heart sinking at the sight of the untouched mail piling up. The door was locked, the apartment eerily quiet. Rachel called the police, her voice shaking as she reported Emily missing. The Evergreen Police Department, unaccustomed to serious crime in their small town, launched a search. Volunteers scoured the forests and riverbanks, clutching flyers with Emily's photo, her bright smile a painful reminder of what was at stake. But days passed with no sign of her, and the town's hope began to waver. The detectives turned their attention to David Foster. His name came up immediately. Emily's friends were quick to point out his controlling behavior. When questioned, David was calm, almost rehearsed. He claimed he and Emily had parted ways amicably at the diner, that she'd seemed fine. She said she needed time to think, he told detectives, his eyes steady. But his story had cracks. Witnesses at the diner recalled tension between the couple, Emily's voice sharp as she spoke to David. And then there was David's car, seen parked near a trailhead by the river that night, a place he claimed he hadn't been. The investigation deepened, and David's facade began to crumble. A search of his rented cabin uncovered a chilling find, a notebook filled with rambling entries about Emily. The words were obsessive, almost poetic, describing her as his forever and detailing his fear of losing her. One entry, dated the day before her disappearance, read, "She can't leave me. I won't let her." The notebook wasn't the only damning evidence. Police found a receipt for duct tape and rope, purchased days earlier, tucked in a drawer, and then in the trunk of David's car, they discovered fibers matching a scarf Emily had been wearing the night she vanished. The breakthrough came 10 days after Emily's disappearance, when a hiker stumbled across a shallow grave near the river, hidden beneath a tangle of ferns. It was Emily. Her body bore the marks of a struggle. She'd been strangled, her wrists bruised from fighting back. The medical examiner confirmed she died the night she disappeared, her life stolen in a moment of rage. The town of Evergreen reeled, its innocence shattered. Emily, the artist who'd brought color to their world, was gone, her dreams buried in the cold earth. Detectives brought David in for another round of questioning, this time armed with the evidence. His composure cracked, his voice rising as he denied everything. But the fibers, the notebook, the receipt, they painted a picture he couldn't escape. Under pressure, David's story shifted. He admitted to seeing Emily after the diner, claiming they'd argued by the river. "She pushed me away," he said, his words laced with venom. "I didn't mean to hurt her." But the evidence told a different story, one of premeditation, of a man who couldn't let go. The case against David Foster was built on obsession. Emails between him and Emily, recovered from her laptop, revealed his escalating demands, messages begging her to stay, then threatening her when she resisted. A friend of David's, a mechanic who'd worked with him, came forward with a haunting detail. David had asked about disposing of evidence, joking about making someone disappear. The pieces fit together like a puzzle, each one a step closer to justice for Emily. The trial, held in the spring of 2001, was a reckoning for Evergreen. The prosecution laid out a meticulous case, presenting the notebook, the fibers, and the testimony of Emily's friends. Rachel took the stand, her voice breaking as she described Emily's fear in her final days. She wanted to be free, Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. He wouldn't let her. The defense argued that David's actions were a crime of passion, not premeditation, that he'd snapped in a moment of heartbreak. But the jury saw through the excuses. After a tense deliberation, they delivered their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. David Foster was sentenced to life without parole, his fate sealed in a courtroom heavy with grief. Evergreen was never the same. Emily's apartment was cleared out, her artwork donated to a local gallery in her memory. Her friends established a fund to raise awareness about relationship violence, a tribute to the woman who'd fought for her freedom. The riverbank where she was found became a place of quiet reflection, a spot where locals left flowers and whispered prayers, a reminder that love can twist into something deadly when control takes root. As the rain falls outside, Emily Clark's story lingers, a whisper in the mist. She was an artist, a dreamer, a woman who dared to choose herself. David Foster thought he could possess her, could bind her to him forever. He was wrong. Emily's spirit lives on in the colors she painted, in the life she touched, in the town that carries her memory. The shadows of the past hold her story, and they will not let it fade. The rain continues its mournful song, carrying us from the rivers of Evergreen to the bustling streets of Dallas, Texas. Another life is taken. Another truth waits to be uncovered. Stay with us. The shadows have more to reveal. Part 5, The Murder of Katherine Miller, Dallas, Texas, July 12, 2000. In the sprawling, sunlit city of Dallas, Texas, the summer of 2000 pulsed with ambition and energy. Skyscrapers gleamed against the horizon, and the streets hummed with the dreams of those chasing success. But beneath the city's glittering surface, a darker current flowed, one that would engulf Katherine Miller, a journalist whose pursuit of truth cost her everything. Her story is one of courage met with cruelty, of a woman who dared to challenge power only to find herself ensnared in a web of corruption and betrayal. This is a tale that begins with a spark of defiance and ends in a silence that still echoes. Katherine Miller was 34 years old, a rising star at the Dallas Chronicle. Her investigative reporting was fearless, her pen a weapon against the city's underbelly of greed and deceit. She had a knack for uncovering what others wanted hidden: shady real estate deals, political kickbacks, corporate fraud. Colleagues described her as relentless, a woman who chased leads with the tenacity of a bloodhound. But Katherine was more than her work. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend who filled rooms with her quick wit and infectious laugh. Her apartment, tucked in a quiet corner of Dallas, was a sanctuary of books and handwritten notes, a testament to her love of stories, especially the ones that mattered. In the spring of 2000, Katherine was deep into her most dangerous story yet. She was investigating Richard Grayson, a wealthy businessman whose empire of real estate and investments cast a long shadow over Dallas. Rumors swirled about Grayson's ties to organized crime, money laundering, extortion, payoffs to city officials. Katherine's sources, often meeting her in dimly lit parking garages or back booths of diners, fed her fragments of a scandal that could topple Grayson's carefully constructed world. Her editor, Jack Thompson, warned her to tread carefully. "This guy is untouchable," he said, his voice heavy with concern. Katherine just smiled. "No one's untouchable," she replied, her eyes alight with determination. But as Katherine dug deeper, the air around her grew heavy with menace. She told her sister Emily about strange occurrences, a car tailing her home, anonymous calls that hung up when she answered. Her apartment was broken into, though nothing was taken, just papers scattered like a warning. Friends noticed a change in her, a wariness that hadn't been there before, yet Katherine pressed on, driven by a belief that the truth was worth any risk. "If I don't do this," she told Jack, "who will?" Those words, spoken in the newsroom just days before her death, would haunt him forever. On the evening of July 12, 2000, Katherine was working late in her apartment, her desk littered with notes and coffee cups. The city outside buzzed with its usual rhythm, but inside the silence was thick. Around 10 p.m., a neighbor heard a muffled thud, followed by footsteps retreating down the stairwell. It was fleeting, easy to dismiss as the noise of urban life, but by morning when Katherine didn't show up for a meeting at the Chronicle, alarm bells rang. Jack, sensing something was wrong, drove to her apartment. The door was ajar, the lock intact. He called her name, his voice trembling. No answer. Stepping inside, he found a scene that would sear itself into his memory. Katherine lay on her living room floor, her body still, surrounded by a chaos of overturned books and shattered glass. She had been stabbed repeatedly, the wounds deep and frenzied as if fueled by rage. Blood stained the carpet, pooling beneath her. Papers from her investigation were strewn about, some torn, others missing. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows, no splintered door. Whoever did this had been let in or had a key or knew Katherine well enough to bypass her defenses. The Dallas Police Department descended on the scene, their faces grim. This wasn't a random crime. This was personal. The investigation began with a flurry of questions. Who had reason to silence Katherine? Her work pointed to one name above all, Richard Grayson. His wealth and influence made him a daunting target, but detectives couldn't ignore the connection. Grayson, when questioned, was polished and composed, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the chaos of the crime scene. "I barely knew her," he said, his voice smooth. "She was just a journalist sniffing around for a story, but his alibi for the night of the murder was vague. Dinner with associates, no specific times or witnesses." Detectives noted his calm, almost rehearsed demeanor, a man too controlled for comfort. As they dug into Katherine's life, another suspect emerged, Marcus Blackwell, a former employee of Grayson's with a history of petty crime. Marcus had been fired from Grayson's company months earlier, reportedly for stealing, though some whispered he knew too much about his boss's dealings. A tip from one of Katherine's sources led police to Marcus. He'd been seen near her apartment building in the days before her death, his presence unexplained. When detectives searched his rundown motel room, they found a strand of hair that matched Katherine's, a chilling clue that tied him to the scene. Marcus was brought in for questioning, his nervous energy a stark contrast to Grayson's icy calm. Under pressure, he cracked, his confession spilling out like a dam breaking. He admitted to killing Katherine, but he didn't act alone. According to Marcus, Grayson had hired him to scare Katherine, to make her back off her investigation. The plan was intimidation, not murder, but things spiraled out of control. "She fought back," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "I panicked." His words painted Grayson as the mastermind, a man who uses wealth to orchestrate a murder while keeping his hands clean. The evidence began to mount. Fingerprints in Katherine's apartment, initially overlooked, matched Grayson's, placing him at the scene. Emails between Grayson and Marcus, recovered from a burner phone, revealed coded messages about handling the problem. Katherine's notes, recovered from a hidden flash drive, detailed Grayson's criminal network, names, dates, transactions that could have sent him to prison for lifer. The case was no longer about a single murder. It was about exposing an empire built on corruption. The trial, held in the winter of 2001, was a spectacle that gripped Dallas. The prosecution painted Grayson as a ruthless predator, a man who saw Katherine's truth as a threat to his power. They presented the fingerprints, the emails, and Marcus's testimony, each piece a nail in Grayson's coffin. Katherine's colleagues took the stand, their voices breaking as they spoke of her courage. Jack Thompson, her editor, recounted her final days, her determination to finish the story no matter the cost. She wasn't afraid of him, Jack said, his voice cracking. She was afraid of what would happen if she didn't do the right thing. Grayson's defense team fought back, portraying him as a victim of circumstance, a businessman targeted by a desperate criminal. They argued that Marcus acted alone, that Grayson's involvement was fabricated to secure a lighter sentence for the real killer. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury, after a tense deliberation, returned a verdict: guilty. Richard Grayson was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy, sentenced to life without parole. Marcus Blackwell for his role in cooperation, received a reduced sentence, though the court made clear his actions were unforgivable. Dallas was forever changed by Katherine's murder. Her family, reeling from the loss, sat through the trial with stoic resolve. Her sister Emily spoke to reporters outside the courthouse, her voice trembling with grief and anger. "My sister wasn't a random victim," she said. "She was murdered because she dared to tell the truth. We'll make sure her work lives on." The Chronicle published Katherine's final story, a damning expose of Grayson's empire, posthumously fulfilling her mission. Her family established a foundation in her name, supporting investigative journalists and press freedom, a legacy born from her sacrifice. The city mourned, but it also awakened. Katherine's death exposed the rot beneath Dallas's polished exterior, sparking calls for reform and accountability. Her apartment, once a haven of ideas, was cleared out, but her spirit lingered in the stories she told, the lives she touched. As the rain falls outside, Katherine Miller's story whispers through the shadows, a testament to a woman who burned brightly, even in the face of darkness. Richard Grayson thought he could silence her, could bury her truth in blood. He was wrong. Katherine's voice endures, carried by those who refuse to let her light fade. The rain continues its mournful rhythm, carrying us from the streets of Dallas to the quiet town of Oakwood, Ohio. Another life is stolen. Another secret waits to be uncovered. Stay with us. The shadows have more to tell. Part 6. The Murder of Laura Bennett. Oakwood, Ohio. August 10, 2000. In the small town of Oakwood, Ohio, the summer of 2000 was a time of golden days and starlit nights. The streets were lined with maple trees, their leaves rustling in the warm breeze, and the air carried the laughter of children playing in backyards. Oakwood was a place where doors were left unlocked, where neighbors shared coffee and secrets over picket fences. But beneath this idyllic surface, a darkness was brewing, one that would claim the life of Laura Bennett, a beloved teacher whose warmth touched every heart she met. Her story is one of love, twisted into obsession, of trust shattered by deceit, and of a town forever scarred by the truth that emerged from the shadows. Laura Bennett was 36 years old, a middle school teacher at Oakwood Middle School, where she taught for over a decade. Her classroom was a sanctuary, a place where students found not just knowledge, but kindness. Laura had a gift for seeing the potential in every child, her gentle encouragement coaxing even the shyest to shine. Outside the school, she was a pillar of the community, organizing bake sales, volunteering at the library, always ready with a smile. Laura's life seemed perfect, especially after her engagement to Mark Stevens, a charming newcomer who'd swept her off her feet 6 months earlier. They were planning a weekend getaway to a lake cabin, a chance to escape before the school year began. To everyone who knew them, Laura and Mark were a fairy tale come to life. But fairy tales, as Oakwood would learn, can hide nightmares. By the summer of 2000, those closest to Laura noticed subtle changes. Her usual radiance seemed dimmed, her laughter less frequent. She confided in a colleague, Lisa, about Mark's behavior. He'd grown possessive, she said, his affection tinged with control. He'd show up at the school unannounced, text her constantly, and grow irritable when she spent time with friends. "He's just protective," Laura told Lisa, her voice uncertain. But Lisa saw the worry in her eyes, the way Laura glanced at her phone as if expecting another message. Friends later recalled Laura's hesitation about the engagement, her quiet mentions of needing space to think. She loved Mark, but something felt wrong, a shadow she couldn't name. On the morning of August 10, 2000, Laura was supposed to meet colleagues at the school to prepare for the new term. When she didn't show up, they assumed she'd left early for her trip with Mark. But as hours passed without a word, concern grew. Lisa called Laura's phone, then Mark's. Both went to voicemail. By evening, Laura's mother, Karen Bennett, reported her missing, her voice trembling with fear. The Oakwood Police Department, unaccustomed to serious crime, launched a search. Volunteers combed the town, their flashlights coming through the dusk, while flyers with Laura's photo, her warm smile framed by auburn hair, appeared on every lamppost. The town held its breath, praying for a simple explanation. But hope would soon give way to dread. The first clue came 2 days later, when Laura's car was found abandoned on a rural road just outside Oakwood. It was locked, her purse and phone inside, an unopened bottle of water on the seat. There were no signs of a struggle, no tire marks or footprints to suggest foul play. The discovery was puzzling, almost ghostly. As if Laura had simply vanished, detectives turned their attention to Mark Stevens. His absence in the hours after Laura's disappearance raised red flags. When questioned, Mark claimed he'd been home, unaware of Laura's plans. "She said she was going for a walk," he told police, his voice flat, but his story didn't add up. Phone records showed he'd been near the area where Laura's car was found, a detail he hadn't mentioned. As detectives dug deeper, Mark's past began to unravel. Former girlfriends revealed a pattern of troubling behavior: jealousy, stalking, even a restraining order from one who'd feared for her safety. Laura's friends shared her concerns about Mark's controlling nature, how she'd grown uneasy in the weeks before her disappearance. A chilling detail emerged from a colleague. Laura had planned to use the lake trip to distance herself from Mark, to decide whether to end the engagement. She wanted to find herself again, the colleague said, her voice heavy with regret. The pieces were falling into place, and they pointed to a man whose love had turned lethal. The investigation took a darker turn when police uncovered a series of text messages between Laura and Mark, sent the night before she vanished. The exchange began innocently, Laura asking about their trip, Mark responding with affection. But as the conversation continued, Mark's tone shifted. "You don't know what I've done," he texted just after midnight. Laura's reply was confused. "What do you mean?" He gave me no answer. He didn't respond. The messages stopped, a silent omen of what was to come. Detectives traced Mark's movements, finding gaps in his alibi. His phone had pinged near the rural road where Laura's car was found, contradicting his claim of being home. On August 16, a breakthrough came when Mark was caught trying to sell Laura's car at a local dealership, forging the title. The dealer, suspicious, alerted police. Mark was arrested, still insisting Laura had left him, that she was somewhere out there. But a search of his apartment revealed a chilling collection. Photos of Laura taken without her knowledge, a stash of love letters filled with obsessive devotion, and a journal detailing his fixation. "She's mine," he wrote, the words scrawled in frantic loops. "No one else can have her." The most damning evidence was found in a hidden storage unit Mark rented. Inside were Laura's suitcase, her clothing, and a blood-stained shirt matching the fabric of her outfit the night she vanished. The blood was hers. The case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a murder inquiry. On August 21, a hiker in a wooded area near the lake discovered human remains, partially hidden under leaves. It was Laura. An autopsy confirmed she'd been strangled, her life taken just hours after her last text to Mark. The town of Oakwood, where violent crime was unheard of, was engulfed in grief and disbelief. Laura, the teacher who'd inspired countless students, was gone, her kindness extinguished by the man she'd trusted. Mark's trial, held in early 2001, was a reckoning for Oakwood. The prosecution painted him as a predator, his obsession with Laura spiraling into a calculated act of violence. They presented the journal, the bloodstained shirt, and the text messages, each piece a thread in a tapestry of guilt. Laura's mother, Karen, took the stand, her voice steady despite her pain. She was trying to break free, Karen said, tears streaming down her face. He couldn't let her. The defense argued that Mark had acted in a moment of temporary insanity, driven by heartbreak, but the evidence of premeditation, the storage unit, the forged title, was undeniable. After a brief deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Mark Stevens was sentenced to life without parole, his fate sealed in a courtroom filled with anguished faces. Oakwood was forever changed. Laura's students left notes outside the school, their words a testament to her impact. "You made me believe in myself." Her family, shattered by loss, found solace in the community's support. Karen established a scholarship in Laura's name, helping underprivileged students attend Oakwood Middle School, a tribute to her daughter's legacy. The lake, once a place of joy, became a somber reminder of what was lost, its shores dotted with flowers, left by those who mourn. Laura's story is a warning, a whisper of the dangers hidden in love gone wrong. Mark Stevens thought he could possess her, could bind her to him in life and death. He was wrong. Laura's light lives on in the students she inspired, the family she loved, the town that carries her memory. As the rain falls outside, her story lingers, a testament to a woman whose spirit could not be silenced. The shadows of the past hold her truth, and they will not let it fade. The rain continues its mournful cadence, carrying us from the woods of Ohio to the quiet suburbs of Hillcrest. Another life is taken, another secret waits to be uncovered. Stay with us, The shadows have more to tell. Part 7. The Murder of Sarah Mitchell, Hillcrest, Midwest, September 7, 2000. In the quiet suburb of Hillcrest, nestled in the heart of the Midwest, the summer of 2000 was fading into autumn, the air crisp with the promise of change. The streets were lined with tidy lawns and modest homes where families gathered for barbecues and children rode bikes until dusk. Hillcrest was a place of routine, of safety, where the worst crimes were petty theft or a neighbor's barking dog. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, a darkness was festering, one that would claim the life of Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose kindness defined her. Her story is one of trust eroded by control, of love twisted into obsession, and of a community forced to confront the monsters hiding in plain sight. Sarah Mitchell was 32 years old, an elementary school teacher whose classroom was a haven of warmth and wonder. Her students adored her for her patience, for the way she turned lessons into adventures. Sarah had a gift for making every child feel special, her gentle voice soothing even the most anxious hearts. Outside the school, she was a devoted wife to John Mitchell, the software engineer who moved to Hillcrest with her 5 years earlier. Their home, a charming bungalow with a wraparound porch, was the picture of suburban bliss. A garden blooming with roses, a swing set for the children they hoped to have. To neighbors, the Mitchells were a model couple, their lives a tapestry of shared dreams and quiet evenings. But behind closed doors, the threads of their marriage were unraveling, pulled taut by John's growing need for control. By the summer of 2000, Sarah's friends noticed a shift. Her usual spark seemed dimmed, her smiles tinged with strain. She confided in a colleague, Megan, about John's behavior. He'd become possessive, she said, his once supportive nature replaced by suspicion and demands. He monitored her phone, questioned her time away from home, and grew angry over small things. A late parent-teacher conference, a coffee with a friend. And he says it's because he loves me, Sarah told Megan, her voice heavy with doubt. But it doesn't feel like love. Megan urged her to seek help, but Sarah hesitated, clinging to the hope that things would improve. She didn't know that John's control was tightening, a noose she couldn't see. Unbeknownst to most, Sarah was making plans to leave. She'd opened a secret bank account, squirreling away money for a fresh start. She'd even contacted a realtor about apartments, dreaming of a life where she could breathe freely. But John wasn't blind to her distance. Friends later revealed he'd grown paranoid, convinced Sarah was pulling away. He installed cameras in their home, hidden in corners she'd never suspect, watching her every move. His obsession wasn't born of love, but of fear. Fear of losing the life he'd built, the image he'd crafted. Sarah, in her quiet rebellion, was a threat he couldn't tolerate. On the evening of September 7th, 2000, Sarah was at home preparing lesson plans in the living room. John, according to neighbors, was seen leaving the house around 6 p.m., his car pulling out of the driveway with unusual haste. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy with anticipation. Around 9 p.m., a neighbor noticed the Mitchells' porch light was off, an oddity for a house always aglow. They thought little of it, assuming Sarah had gone to bed early, but by morning, when Sarah didn't arrive at school, her absence sent ripples of worry through Hillcrest. Megan, her colleague, called her phone, then John's, no answer. Driven by a gnawing fear, she drove to the Mitchells' home and found the front door unlocked. Stepping inside, she called Sarah's name. Silence answered. The police were summoned, their arrival shattering the morning calm. The house was pristine, no signs of a break-in, no overturned furniture, but Sarah was gone. A small smear of blood on the kitchen floor, later confirmed as hers, was the only hint of violence. The officers searched the house, their unease grown when they discovered the hidden cameras, their lenses capturing every corner of Sarah's life. The footage was chilling. Hours of Sarah moving through her home, unaware she was being watched. The last recording, timestamped 8:47 p.m. the previous night, showed Sarah in the kitchen, her face tense, before the screen went black. Something, or someone, had turned the system off. The Hillcrest Police Department launched a search, their resources stretched thin in a town unaccustomed to such mysteries. Volunteers scoured parks and fields, clutching flyers with Sarah's photo, her kind eyes a painful reminder of what was at stake. The community rallied, but fear crept in, a shadow over their once safe streets. Detectives focused on John Mitchell. His behavior in the hours after Sarah's disappearance was off. calm, almost detached, as he claimed she'd gone for a walk and never returned. "She does that sometimes," he said, his voice devoid of urgency. But his alibi unraveled quickly. Neighbors reported seeing his car return late that night, long after he claimed to be asleep. Phone records showed he'd been in a remote area outside Hillcrest, a detail he couldn't explain. As the investigation deepened, John's past came into focus. Former colleagues described him as controlling, a man who demanded order in every aspect of his life. Sarah's friends revealed her plans to leave her secret account a lifeline she'd hoped would free her. The cameras were the most damning discovery, their existence painting a portrait of a man consumed by paranoia. Detectives recovered deleted footage from the system, showing John and Sarah arguing in the days before her death. In one clip, Sarah's voice was sharp. "I can't live like this anymore." John's response was inaudible, but his posture, looming, tense, spoke volumes. On September 14, a week after Sarah vanished, a dog walker in a forested area 5 miles from Hillcrest stumbled across a shallow grave. The body inside was Sarah's. She'd been killed by blunt force trauma, her skull fractured by a heavy object. The medical examiner estimated she died the night she disappeared, her life stolen in a moment of rage. The discovery sent shockwaves through Hillcrest, shattering the town's sense of security. Sarah, the teacher who'd nurtured so many, was gone, her dreams buried in the cold earth. The case against John Mitchell solidified with chilling precision. A search of his car revealed traces of Sarah's blood in the trunk, faint but unmistakable. A hammer, missing from the couple's garage, was found discarded in a nearby creek, its handle bearing John's fingerprints and traces of Sarah's DNA. The hidden cameras provided a timeline showing John's return to the house after his supposed departure. His journal, tucked in a locked drawer, was a window into his obsession, filled with entries about Sarah's disloyalty and his need to fix things. One passage, dated the day before her death, read, "She's slipping away. I can't let her go." John's interrogation was a study in unraveling composure. He maintained his innocence, claiming Sarah had left him, that someone else must have harmed her, but the evidence was a tide he couldn't stem. Faced with the blood, the hammer, and the footage, he grew silent, his face pale. Detectives pressed, and his story crumbled. He admitted to an argument that night, claiming it got out of hand, but the premeditation, the cameras, the grave, told a different story. John Mitchell hadn't just killed Sarah, he'd planned to erase her to preserve his control even in her death. The trial, held in the spring of 2001, was a crucible for Hillcrest. The prosecution laid out a meticulous case, presenting the cameras, the hammer, and the journal, each piece a thread in a tapestry of guilt. Megan took the stand, her voice breaking as she described Sarah's fear. She wanted to be free, she said, tears streaming down her face. She was so close. The defense argued that John had acted in a moment of passion, that the cameras were for security, not surveillance, but the jury saw through the lies. After a brief deliberation, they returned a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and unlawful disposal of a body. John Mitchell was sentenced to life without parole, his fate sealed in a courtroom heavy with sorrow. Hillcrest was forever changed. Sarah's students left drawings outside the school, their childish scrawls, a testament to her impact. "We miss you, Mrs. Mitchell." Her parents, devastated, found solace in the community's support, though the loss was a wound that wouldn't heal. They established a foundation in Sarah's name, raising awareness about domestic violence, a tribute to the daughter they'd lost. The bungalow, once a symbol of hope, was sold, its memories too heavy to bear. The forest where Sarah was found became a place of quiet reflection, a spot where locals left flowers and whispered prayers. Sarah's story is a warning, a whisper of the dangers hidden in the places we feel safest. John Mitchell thought he could control her, could bind her to him in life and death. He was wrong. Sarah's light lives on, in the students she inspired, the family she loved, the town that carries her memory. As the rain falls outside, her story lingers, a testament to a woman whose spirit could not be silenced. The shadows of the past hold her truth, and they will not let it fade. The rain continues its mournful song, carrying us from the suburbs of Hillcrest to the sunlit streets of Florida. Another life is touched by injustice. Another truth waits to be uncovered. Stay with us. The shadows have more to tell. Part 8, The Wrongful Conviction of Juan Melendez, Florida, September 2000. In the sun-drenched state of Florida, where palm trees sway and the ocean hums its endless song, the year 2000 was a time of vibrant life and hidden struggles. Beneath the state's postcard-perfect surface, a different story unfolded, one of injustice, of a man caught in the gears of a flawed system, his life stolen not by a blade or a bullet, but by the weight of a wrongful conviction. This is the story of Juan Melendez, a man who spent 17 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit, a tale of resilience, redemption, and a truth that fought its way into the light. It begins in a barbershop with a single act of violence and ends with a cry for justice that echoes still. Juan Melendez was 33 years old in 1984, a Puerto Rican migrant worker who'd come to Florida seeking a better life. He was no stranger to hardship, having grown up in poverty, moving from job to job, picking fruit, cleaning houses, anything to make ends meet. Juan was quiet, unassuming, with a quick smile and a love for his family back in Puerto Rico. He settled in Auburndale, a small town in Polk County, where he found work as a handyman and occasional laborer. His life was simple, his dreams modest, a steady job, a place to call home. But on September 13, 1983, that simplicity was shattered when a murder in a local barbershop set the stage for a nightmare that would consume nearly 2 decades of his life. The victim was Delbert Baker, a 56-year-old barber who ran a small shop in Auburndale. Baker was known for his friendly demeanor, his chair, a hub for local gossip and laughter, but he also had a darker side, rumored to dabble in small-time drug deals, a fact that brought unsavory characters to his door. On that fateful evening, Baker was found dead in his shop, his throat slit, the floor slick with blood. The scene was brutal, chaotic, with signs of a struggle. Overturned chairs, a shattered mirror, cash was missing from the register, and a gold watch Baker always wore was gone. The police, under pressure to solve the high-profile case, launched a frantic investigation, their eyes scanning Auburndale for suspects. Juan Melendez, a man with no criminal record, became their target almost by chance. He was known to have visited Baker's shop occasionally for haircuts, a tenuous connection that caught the attention of detectives. 2 witnesses, both with troubled pasts, pointed the finger at Juan. The first was Vernon James, a convicted felon facing drug charges who claimed he'd seen Juan near the barbershop the night of the murder. The second was John Barine, a man with a history of mental instability who said Juan had confessed to him while drunk. Their stories were shaky, riddled with inconsistencies, but in the rush to close the case, they were enough. Juan was arrested, his life upended in a matter of hours. Though the evidence against Juan was thin, almost non-existent, there was no physical proof tying him to the crime. No fingerprints, no blood, no murder weapon. The case hinged entirely on the word of James and Berrien, both of whom had motives to lie. James, it later emerged, was offered a reduced sentence for his testimony, while Berrien's account shifted with every telling. Juan maintained his innocence, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I wasn't there," he told detectives. "I don't know why they're saying this," but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The Polk County Sheriff's Office, eager for a conviction, pressed forward, and Juan, unable to afford a competent lawyer, was assigned a public defender, overwhelmed by cases. The trial, held in 1984, was a travesty of justice. The prosecution painted Juan as a dangerous drifter, leaning heavily on the witnesses' testimony despite their contradictions. Vernon James claimed Juan had bragged about the murder, but couldn't recall key details, like the time or place of the supposed confession. John Berrien's story was even less coherent. His mental health issues dismissed by the court. Juan's defense was woefully inadequate. His lawyer failed to challenge the witnesses' credibility or highlight the lack of physical evidence. The jury, swayed by the prosecution's narrative and the community's demand for closure, deliberated for just a few hours before delivering a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Juan was sentenced to death, his fate sealed in a courtroom that reeked of haste and prejudice. As Juan was led away in chains, his mother, back in Puerto Rico, collapsed in tears, unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding. Juan was sent to Florida's death row, a place where hope was a rare commodity. The cells were stark, the air heavy with despair. For 17 years, Juan lived under the shadow of the electric chair, his days marked by the clank of metal doors and the distant screams of other enemies. He wrote letters to his family, his handwriting steady despite the weight of his words. "I am innocent," he wrote. "God knows the truth." But the system seemed determined to bury that truth, to let Juan's life slip away in silence. The years dragged on, each one a test of Juan's spirit. He found solace in small things, reading books smuggled by sympathetic guards, sketching scenes from his childhood, praying for a miracle. Outside, his family and a handful of advocates fought to keep his case alive, but appeals were denied one after another. Witnesses' recantations, which came years later, were dismissed as unreliable. Vernon James admitted he'd lied to save himself, while John Borain confessed his story was fabricated, coerced by police pressure. Yet the courts refused to reconsider, trapped in a web of bureaucracy and pride. The turning point came in 1999, when a new attorney, Dale Recanella, took up Juan's case. Recanella, a former Wall Street lawyer turned death row advocate, saw the glaring flaws in the conviction. He dug through old files, chasing leads the original defense had ignored. His persistence led to a bombshell. A taped confession from another man, David Luna Falcon, recorded years earlier, but buried in police records. Falcon, a known associate of Baker's with a violent history, had confessed to the murder in 1987, detailing the crime with chilling accuracy. He described the watch, the cash, the layout of the barber shop, details only the killer could know. The tape had been ignored, dismissed as irrelevant by a system that had already chosen its scapegoat. Recanella's discovery cracked the case open. Armed with the tape and the recanted testimonies, he filed a motion for a new trial. The process was grueling, a battle against a system reluctant to admit its mistakes, but the evidence was undeniable. In September 2000, a judge ordered a review of Juan's case, and by January 2002, the state dropped all charges. Juan Melendez walked out of prison a free man, his eyes squinting against the sunlight he hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. He was 51 years old, his youth stolen, his body worn but his spirit unbroken. "I never gave up," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew the truth would come." The aftermath was bittersweet. Juan returned to Puerto Rico, embraced by a family that had never stopped believing in him. But the years lost could never be regained. He struggled with the trauma of death row, the memories of men executed around him, the constant fear of his own death. The state offered no apology, no compensation for the life they'd taken. Vernon James and John Berrien faced no consequences for their lies, their roles in Juan's ordeal fading into the shadows. David Luna Falcon, the true killer, had died in 1995, escaping justice. The system that failed Juan continued to churn, its flaws exposed but not fully mended. Juan's story became a rallying cry for reform. He began speaking at universities and rallies, his soft voice carrying the weight of his experience. "I'm not the only one," he said, his words a plea for others still trapped by wrongful convictions. His case spurred changes in Florida, stricter standards for witness testimony, increased funding for public defenders, and a push for DNA testing. The Innocence Project, which supported Juan's release, used his story to highlight the flaws in the death penalty, a punishment that risks the irreversible. By 2002, Juan was one of 100 death row exonerees in the U.S., a number that would grow in the years to come. Auburndale, the town where it all began, grappled with its role in the injustice. Delbert Baker's family, who'd believed Juan was guilty, faced the painful truth that the real killer had walked free. The barbershop, long closed, stood as a silent reminder of a crime that fractured lives. Juan's release was a victory, but it came with a cost, a reminder of how easily justice can falter, how quickly a life can be erased by assumption and error. As the rain falls outside, Juan Melendez's story lingers, a whisper of resilience and redemption. He was a man who survived the unimaginable, who held fast to hope when the world turned against him. The system that condemned him thought it could bury his truth, could silence his voice. It was wrong. Juan's story lives on, in the laws he helped change, the lives he inspires, the fight for a justice that sees clearly. The shadows of the past fold his truth, and they will not let it fade. The rain continues its mournful rhythm, carrying us from the sunlit streets of Florida to the distant shores of India. Another story of suffering unfolds. Another truth waits to be uncovered. Stay with us. The shadows have more to tell. Part 9. The Case of Syrian Elli, 2000. In the vibrant, chaotic tapestry of India, the year 2000 was a time of contrasts. Ancient traditions clashing with modern ambitions, bustling cities pulsing alongside quiet villages. Beneath the surface of this dynamic nation, a darker reality festered, one that would ensnare countless women in a web of violence and silence. Among them was Syrian Elli, a name that became a symbol of courage in the face of unimaginable horror. Her story is not one of a single act, but of a prolonged nightmare, a series of sexual assaults that expose the deep-seated flaws of a society and its justice system. This is a tale of resilience, of a woman who refused to be silenced, and of a nation forced to confront its own shadows. Syrian Elli was a young woman in her early 20s, living in a small town in northern India. Her life was modest, shaped by the rhythms of family and community. She worked as a seamstress, her nimble fingers crafting intricate patterns that brought joy to those around her. Syrian was known for her quiet strength, her shy smile, a beacon in a world that could be hard. Like many women in her town, she navigated a society where gender norms dictated her place, where safety was a privilege, not a guarantee. But in the late 1990s, Syrian's world was shattered by a series of attacks that would test her spirit and ignite a firestorm of change. The assaults began in 1998, though the full scope of the horror would only emerge later. Syrian, like other women in her community, was targeted by a group of men led by a figure known as Darbar Rajan, a local power broker with a reputation for cruelty. Rajan and his associates operated with impunity, their influence shielding them from scrutiny. The attacks were methodical, often occurring under the cover of night, in isolated areas where cries for help went unheard. Syrian was one of many victims, her life upended by violence that left scars, both physical and emotional. The perpetrators relied on fear and shame to keep their crimes hidden, knowing that societal stigma would silence their victims. But as Syrian was different, despite the weight of trauma, she refused to stay silent. In early 2000, she made a decision that would alter the course of her life and her nation's history. She reported the assaults to the police. Her courage was extraordinary in a society where victims of sexual violence were often blamed, their reputations tarnished, their voices dismissed. Syrian faced hostility from her community, whispers that she was ruined, that she should have stayed quiet. Yet she persisted, driven by a need for justice, not just for herself, but for the other women whose stories mirrored her own. Her bravery became a spark, igniting a case that would shake India to its core. The investigation, however, was a labyrinth of obstacles. The local police were ill-equipped and in some cases complicit. Rajan's influence loomed large. Rumors swirled of bribes paid to officers, of evidence misplaced or ignored. Initial reports were mishandled, with officers questioning Syrian's credibility rather than pursuing her attackers. "Why are you out so late?" they asked, their tone accusatory. The delays were maddening, allowing Rajan and his accomplices to evade capture for months. Syrian's family, fearing retaliation, urged her to stop, but she refused. "If I don't speak," she told her sister, her voice trembling but resolute, "who will?" As word of Syrian case spread, other women came forward, their stories echoing hers. The scope of the crimes grew chillingly clear. A network of predators protected by wealth and power had targeted vulnerable women across the region for years. The media, initially slow to respond, began to amplify the story, dubbing it the Syrian Elli case to protect her identity while honoring her courage. Protests erupted in cities like Delhi and Mumbai, with women's groups demanding accountability. The pressure forced the authorities to act, though their efforts were marred by incompetence. In mid-2000, Rajan and several associates were finally arrested, their smug confidence shaken by the growing public outcry. The evidence against the perpetrators was harrowing. Medical examinations confirmed Syrian's injuries consistent with repeated assaults. Witnesses, emboldened by her example, described seeing Rajan and his men near the sites of the attacks. A breakthrough came when police raided Rajan's property, uncovering a cache of incriminating items. Photographs, clothing, and documents linking him to the victims. Yet even with this evidence, the case faced setbacks. Key witnesses were intimidated, some retracting their statements under pressure. The defense exploited societal biases, painting Syrian and the other victims as unreliable, their stories exaggerated for attention. The courtroom became a battleground not just for justice, but for the dignity of those who'd suffered. Syrian's testimony was the heart of the trial. She took the stand in late 2000, her voice steady despite the weight of every eye upon her. She recounted the assaults in unflinching detail, her words cutting through the room's stifling air. "I'm here for the truth," she said, her gaze fixed on the judge. "I'm here for all of us." Her courage galvanized the other victims, who testified one by one. their collective voices a chorus of defiance. So the prosecution, led by a determined young lawyer named Priya Sharma, wove their stories into a powerful narrative, exposing the systemic failures that had allowed the crimes to persist. This isn't just about one woman, Sharma argued. It's about a society that looked away. The trial stretched into 2001, each day a test of endurance for Syrian and her supporters. Regine, unrepentant, maintained his innocence, his lawyers spinning tales of conspiracy and jealousy, but the evidence was overwhelming. DNA traces, recovered items, and the sheer number of corroborating accounts. The public's outrage grew, fueled by media coverage that refused to let the story fade. Protesters outside the courthouse held signs reading "Justice for Syrian," their chants a reminder that this was no longer just a case, but a movement. In early 2002, the verdict came. Darbar Regine and 3 accomplices were convicted of multiple counts of rape and assault, sentenced to life in prison. 2 others received lighter sentences for lesser charges, a decision that sparked criticism for its leniency. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and frustration. Justice had been served, but not fully. Serene, flanked by her family, left the courthouse in silence, her face a mask of resolve. "This isn't the end," she told a reporter, her voice soft but firm. "It's a beginning." The Syrian Elli case became a watershed moment for India. It exposed the deep-rooted issues of gender-based violence, police corruption, and societal stigma. The outcry led to significant reforms, culminating in the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 2013, which strengthened penalties for sexual crimes and introduced measures to protect victims. The case also sparked a broader conversation about consent, victim blaming, and the need for cultural change. Women's organizations, inspired by Syrian's courage, launched campaigns to educate communities and support survivors, ensuring her legacy reached far beyond the courtroom. Yet the victory was bittersweet. Syrian, though hailed as a hero, bore the scars of her ordeal. She moved to a new city seeking anonymity, but the trauma lingered, a shadow she carried quietly. Her family faced ostracism from some in their town, a painful reminder of the cost of speaking out. The other victims, too, navigated a world that often judged them harshly. Their bravery met with whispers of shame. Haji and his men were behind bars, but the system that enabled them, its delays, its biases, remained a work in progress. The town where Syrian lived grappled with its role in the silence that had allowed the crimes to fester. The streets, once alive with the hum of daily life, now carried a somber weight. Community leaders held forums, seeking to heal and rebuild, but the wounds were deep. Syrian's story became a rallying cry, a reminder that justice requires not just punishment, but prevention, not just laws, but empathy. Her name, though a pseudonym, became a symbol of resistance, etched into the hearts of those who fought alongside her. As the rain falls outside, Syrian Elli's story lingers, a whisper of courage and defiance. She was a seamstress, a sister, a woman who faced a nightmare and chose to fight. Darbar Regine and his men thought they could break her, could bury her voice in fear and shame. They were wrong. Syrian's truth lives on. In the law she helped change, the women she inspired, the nation she awakened. The shadows of the past hold her story, and they will not let it fade. The rain continues its mournful song, carrying us from the shores of India to the hallowed halls of the United States Supreme Court. Another battle for justice unfolds. Another truth waits to be uncovered. Stay with us. The shadows have more to tell. Part 10. Apprendi v. New Jersey, United States Supreme Court, October 2000. In the autumn of 2000, the marble halls of the United States Supreme Court stood as a beacon of justice, their grandeur a testament to the ideals that shaped a nation. Outside, the streets of Washington, D.C. buzzed with the energy of a new millennium, but within those hallowed walls, a battle was brewing. One that would redefine the boundaries of fairness in the American legal system. This is the story of Apprendi v. New Jersey, a case that began with a single act of violence and grew into a landmark decision, a clash over power, rights, and the very meaning of justice. It's a tale not of blood or loss, but of principles, of a man whose crime exposed a flaw in the law, and of a ruling that reshaped the lives of countless others. It begins in a quiet suburb with the crack of gunfire and ends with the whisper of change that still resonates. Charles Apprendi Jr. was 32 years old in 1994, a resident of Vineland, New Jersey, a small town where life moved at a gentle pace. Apprendi was an unremarkable figure, a husband, a father, a man who worked as a mechanic and kept to himself, but beneath his ordinary exterior, a darker impulse simmered. On the night of December 22, 1994, that impulse erupted in a way that would alter his life and the course of legal history. Apprendi, armed with a .22 caliber rifle, fired multiple shots into the home of an African-American family who'd recently moved into his predominantly white neighborhood. The bullets tore through windows, shattering the peace of a family settling into their new home. No one was injured, but the act was a wound to the community, a stark reminder of hatred's enduring shadow. The police arrested Apprendi hours later, finding the rifle in his home and shell casings that matched the crime scene. When questioned, Apprendi's story shifted. He claimed he'd been drunk, that the shots were a reckless act, not a targeted attack. But his own words betrayed him. In a recorded statement, he admitted to firing the gun because he didn't want those people in his neighborhood. A confession laced with racial animus meant the case seemed straightforward. Apprendi was charged with second-degree unlawful possession of a firearm and related offenses, crimes that carried a maximum sentence of 7 years under New Jersey law. But what happened next would turn a local crime into a constitutional showdown. New Jersey's legal system at the time included a hate crime statute which allowed judges to increase a defendant's sentence if they found by a preponderance of the evidence that the crime was motivated by bias, racial, religious, or otherwise. In Apprendi's case, the prosecution argued that his actions were driven by racial hatred, a claim supported by his own statements. At sentencing, the judge agreed, ruling that the shooting was a hate crime. This finding triggered the hate crime enhancement, extending Apprendi's sentence to 12 years, 5 years beyond the maximum for the original charges. Apprendi's defense team cried foul, arguing that the enhancement violated his constitutional rights. The judge, they contended, had acted as a one-man jury, deciding a critical fact that should have been left to a jury's judgment. The heart of the dispute lay in the Sixth Amendment, which guarantees the right to a trial by jury, and the 14th Amendment, which ensures due process. Apprendi's lawyers argued that any fact that increases a sentence beyond the statutory maximum, like the hate crime finding, must be proven to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt, not decided by a judge on a lower standard of proof. The state of New Jersey countered that the enhancement was merely a sentencing factor within the judge's discretion, not a new element of the crime. The disagreement was more than legal technicality. It was a question of power. How much authority could a judge wield, and how much belonged to the people through a jury? Apprendi's case wound its way through the New Jersey courts, each level affirming the judge's ruling. The state Supreme Court upheld the sentence, dismissing the constitutional concerns. But Apprendi's team, led by attorney Joseph O'Neill, saw a broader issue, a flaw in the system that could affect thousands of defendants. They appealed to the United States Supreme Court, which agreed to hear the case in 2000. The stage was set for a legal battle that would draw the attention of scholars, advocates, and judges across the nation, a clash that would test the balance of justice itself. The Supreme Court arguments held on March 28, 2000, were a masterclass in constitutional debate. Apprendi's counsel argued that the hate crime enhancement effectively created a new offense, one that required a jury's verdict, not a judge's whim. If the government wants to punish a man for his motives, O'Neill said, it must prove those motives to the same standard as the crime itself. New Jersey's attorney, Lisa Sarnoff-Gotchman, defended the state system, insisting that judges had long held the power to consider aggravating factors at sentencing. The practice, she argued, was efficient and fair, rooted in centuries of judicial tradition. The justices, a mix of liberal and conservative voices, probed both sides with relentless precision, their questions revealing the case's profound implication. Behind the legal arguments was Charles Apprendi himself, a man whose actions had sparked this storm. His crime was indefensible, a cowardly act of prejudice that deserved punishment. Yet his case became a vessel for a larger principle, one that transcended his guilt. Apprendi was no hero, but his challenge to the system gave voice to a fundamental question: who decides justice? As the justices deliberated, the nation watched, aware that the outcome would ripple through courtrooms from coast to coast. On June 26, 2000, the Supreme Court delivered its decision in a 5-4 ruling that would reshape American law. Justice John Paul Stevens, writing for the majority, declared that, other than the fact of a prior conviction, any fact that increases the penalty for a crime beyond the prescribed statutory maximum must be submitted to a jury and proved beyond a reasonable doubt. The ruling known as the Apprendi rule, struck down New Jersey's hate crime enhancement as applied in Apprendi's case. The decision was a victory for constitutional protections, reaffirming the jury's role as a bulwark against unchecked judicial power. Justices Sandra Day O'Connor, Anthony Kennedy, David Souter, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg joined Stevens, forming a fragile majority that underscored the ruling's contentiousness. The dissent, led by Justice Stephen Breyer and joined by Chief Justice William Rehnquist, Justice Antonin Scalia, and Justice Clarence Thomas, argued that the majority's ruling disrupted a well-established sentencing framework. Breyer warned of practical challenges, predicting a flood of appeals and strained court systems. But the majority held firm, emphasizing that the Sixth Amendment's promise of a jury trial was non-negotiable. The decision vacated Apprendi's enhanced sentence and sent the case back to New Jersey for resentencing, where he ultimately received a 7-year term within the original statutory maximum. The impact of Apprendi v. New Jersey was seismic. States across the country scrambled to revise their sentencing laws, ensuring that facts triggering enhanced penalties, whether for hate crimes, drug quantities, or weapon use, were decided by juries. The ruling influenced thousands of cases, from minor felonies to high-profile prosecutions. It paved the way for later decisions, like Blakely v. Washington 2004 and United States v. Booker 2005, which further limited judicial discretion in sentencing. Defense attorneys hailed the ruling as a triumph for fairness, while prosecutors grumbled about its complexities. Legal scholars debated its nuances, but all agreed Apprendi had changed the game. But Charles Apprendi, the victory was hollow. He served his sentence, his name forever tied to a crime of hatred and a case that bore his name. The African-American family he targeted moved away, their trust in their new community shattered. Vineland, the town where it all began, grappled with its own reckoning, its quiet streets a reminder of the prejudice that lurked beneath. The Supreme Court's marble halls stood unmoved, their grandeur a silent witness to a decision that redefined justice. The legacy of Apprendi v. New Jersey is one of principle over practicality. It's a reminder that the Constitution's promises to a fair trial to a jury of peers are not mere words, but shields against the overreach of power. The case exposed a flaw in the system, a crack where fairness could slip through, and sealed it with a ruling that endures. It's a story not of a single man, but of the ideals he inadvertently championed. Ideals that protect the guilty and innocent alike. As the rain falls outside, the story of Apprendi v. New Jersey lingers, a whisper of justice won through struggle. Charles Apprendi was no saint, his actions a stain on the fabric of his community. Yet his case became a beacon, illuminating the rights that define a nation. The system that sentenced him thought it could bend the rules, could bypass the jury's sacred role. It was wrong. The truth of Apprendi's case lives on. In the courtrooms it transformed, the defendants it protected, the principles it upheld. The shadows of the past hold its story, and they will not let it fade. The rain continues to fall, a soft curtain drawing closed on tonight's journey through the shadows. These 10 stories of lives lost, truths uncovered, and justice sought remind us that the past is never truly gone. It lingers in the choices we make, the systems we build, the truths we defend. Thank you for joining us on Shadows of the Past. Until next time, let the rain carry you to sleep, and may the shadows keep their secrets. What now?